Welcome everyone to a special edition of our Pallazzo Podcasts. Family here, we have the one, the only Bob Kendrick of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum with us today. My name is Ben Chase. Along with me is our guy Chad, and we're gonna have a chance to just talk with Bob about some of the amazing history of the game that he gets to spend every day talking about. And if you haven't ever heard Bob Kendrick tell stories, uh, you're in for a treat because he is one of the great storytellers in all of the game right now. First off, before we get started, I want to make sure all of you who are watching this on YouTube take the time to hit that subscribe button and that like. If you're on any of the pod streamers out there, make sure you're giving us a nice rating, and because that helps other people find us. So Bob, thank you for coming on. And I guess let everyone else know. You just let us know. Let us know where you're at and what kind of fun things you're up to today, because that's really a cool thing to me.
Yeah, no, I actually thought I'd be in my hotel room on my laptop talking to you guys, but I'm in Birmingham, Alabama at the Negro Southern League Museum, and been in Birmingham all morning shooting some promo stuff in anticipation and preparation for the big salute to the Negro Leagues game that's going to take place June 20th at Rickwood Field here in Birmingham. So Harold Reynolds and others from the MLB network. I got to hang out today with former Major Leaguer Jake Peavy, comedian Roy Woods Jr., who's from Birmingham, Michael Mays, the son of the legendary Willie Mays. So we've all been hanging out pretty much all day. We spoke to a couple of high schools, came over to the Negro Southern League, just filmed a roundtable discussion, just talking about Black baseball history and the importance of Rickwood Field and this upcoming game. And so we've had a full day of events and activities. And so you guys caught me on my cell phone instead of my laptop.
Well, the good news is only for our YouTube folks are they even going to notice. They're going to hear folks who are listening to this on the podcast. They won't know the difference. But that sounds like a busy day already. So thank you for carving out some time with us.
Oh, man, it's my pleasure. Thank you guys so much for having me on the show.
Absolutely. Just give a little background. When I pitched this to your assistant, I mentioned that I was a baseball historian. And I'm not a great historian. I wish I could. One of the reasons that I'm doing this is because I want to be a better historian. But there's parts of the game that, as a white person, I just don't have as much access to as I'd like. Growing up in the 90s, it's a lot different for how media was presented. I went to Cooperstown as a kid, and I was the only kid that came away with a book about the dead ball era. I might be the only 35-year-old who can say his favorite player is Mordecai Brown.
Yes. Yeah.
But that book went from the dead ball era to the late 50s, early 60s. It had Satchel, it had the legendary Jackie Robinson, but they were just little blurbs. And as a kid then, I was obsessed with knowledge. I wanted more. And so later on, I still had that obsession, and that led me to finding you and the museum and just trying to absorb all that knowledge. So I want to thank you, not just for being here, but for everything you've done to bring more history to the game.
Well, I appreciate it, and I kind of chuckle because a lot of people will refer to me as a historian, and I know, fellas, my history teacher would roll over in his grave with anybody recalling this kid from Crawfordville, Georgia, a historian. And honestly, it does a disservice to all of those who, for so many years, dedicated themselves to unearthing and sharing this history. I am a steward of this story, and I enjoy the work that I do. And so I'm right along with you, Chad. I'm a wannabe historian. I'm not sure I'm there yet, but I certainly love having a hand in growing the awareness and interest in the history of the Negro Leagues, and of course the work that we're doing to preserve that history at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum.
I guess we'll jump right into our first topic with that. Tell us a little bit of how your path to the museum and taking over for the late great Buck O'Neill as president of the museum.
Well, my affiliation with this great organization, believe it or not, began 31 years ago as a volunteer. Who knew that you go from being a volunteer to now trying to lead what I believe is one of the most important cultural institutions in the world, that being the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. But the minute that I walked into what was then a one-room office there at historic 18th and Vine in Kansas City, I just absolutely fell in love with the story, and I fell in love with the amazing athletes who made this story. And as a baseball fan, I was surprised by how little I knew about this game and its rich connections to the history of this country. And I guess you could say that I became engrossed in it. I wanted to learn as much as I could. And guys, I didn't want to keep it to myself. I wanted everyone else to feel the same way that I felt about it. And then I started to meet the players. And even as I shared with the high school students today, it was their spirits that grabbed hold of you. Their spirits were so endearing. The fact that they harbored no bitterness or ever expressed any ill will toward anyone who may have attempted to perpetrate something against them as they were trying to play baseball in this country, it grabbed your hearts. Because had they been bitter, we all would have said you had every right to be bitter. But to a player that I ever met, not one of them expressed any bitterness or ill will. And so now I'm falling even deeper in love with the story. And then I met Buck O'Neill. And as I've oftentimes said, once you're bitten by the Buck bug, oh man, it's a wrap. You just want to be on Buck's team. It was it, he had such a passion for this. And when I first met him, one of the first questions that I posed to him was, what motivated you to want to build a Negro Leagues Baseball Museum? And his answer was succinct, but very poignant, so that we would be remembered. And I wanted to be a part of that effort to make sure that these athletes would never be forgotten. Not just the athletes, but also the courageous owners who invested in forming these teams, that their story would never be forgotten. And I had no idea that it would turn into a career and to one of the most gratifying things that I think I could have done either personally or professionally. So this has truly been a labor of love for me.
So, Bob, I guess you mentioned the lack of bitterness, and one of your, I know your favorite player, Henry Aaron, which is why I'm personally a Braves fan here in South Dakota, is my great grandma was a huge Henry Aaron fan, and she got me hooked on him. And years after he had already retired, but at the same time, one of the things I love about reading interviews with him, watching interviews with him, for instance, as Barry Bonds came up alongside and then passed him in the home runs, you didn't hear him complain left, right, and up and down about steroids, about PEDs. He admired what Barry did. He wasn't there. A lot of fans wanted him to be very upset about this, and he just wasn't. And that, to me, that was one of those amazing things. I just read a biography on Oscar Charleston and thought, the comparisons that people throw out, Trish Speaker saying that this is the best center fielder I've ever watched play. And I'm going, well, that's a hell of a guy to say that sort of thing about.
Exactly.
Speaker is considered one of the best center fielders who's ever done it. And you read toward the end of his career, people talking about, well, are you disappointed that now these guys are getting to go to the majors and you never did? And he goes, oh, no. He says, I think if you ask me, we were playing in better ball. We were playing in a tougher ball league when we were playing down in Cuba, when we were playing, our ball, we were playing tougher ball than the guys like Ruth and Gehrig were at that time, which that says something. These guys had a lot of pride in the ball that they were playing, and you could make good arguments like that, quite frankly.
Well, and that was part of the reason that they were never going to be bitter about baseball, because quite honestly, fellas, you could not convince them that they weren't playing the best baseball that was being played. Mm-hmm. Now, the world said the best baseball was being played was in the major leagues, but they never believed that. They knew how good they were. They knew how good their league was. And quite frankly, the major leaguers knew how good they were. So they were never going to be bitter about baseball.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I want to switch gears a little bit. This channel is normally we're very prospect focused. We're very minor league focused. Do a lot of college talk come draft season. And I wanted to tie that in here. So I wanted to touch a topic that I really have no knowledge base on. And that was I know a lot of what happened with when the color barrier broke, but what was the impact to collegiate baseball as that was starting to grow?
Well, the thing that I think, fellas, is probably surprising to a lot of folks about the Negro Leagues is that over 40% of the athletes who played in the Negro Leagues had some level of college education.
mm-hmm.
Less than 5% of those at the same time who were playing in the major leagues had any college education, for the simple reason that the major leagues then did not want you to go to college. They got you out of their farm system, put you into their farm system. They got you out of high school, put you into their farm system, and then you work your way to the big leagues. Well, the Negro Leagues didn't have that same kind of sophisticated farm system. So what happened? They trained on the campuses of historically black colleges and universities. They would then play the black college baseball teams, and then they recruit a great deal of their workforce from those historically black colleges and universities. So it was contrary to the belief that these athletes were vagabonds, tramps, hobos, illiterate. These were very bright men who just happened to love this game. And when they weren't playing this game, they became educators. They did other things in our society to help better our society. And that's an aspect of our story that we also want people to understand. You got to remember that Jackie Robinson walks into a locker room where he might have been the most intellectual being in that locker room. Jackie Robinson, while he didn't go to an HBCU, had gone to Pasadena City College and, of course, UCLA. I'm not sure there was another Dodger that had stepped foot on a college campus. And yet he was treated in such this incredibly harsh manner until he broke down that barrier of fear. You know, so much in our society is guided by stereotypes, misnomers. Somebody said that you were this way and I bought into it. Somebody told you that I was this way and you bought into it. But then when we're together in that locker room, all of a sudden you're seeing that, man, he's no different than I am. And I think that's the beauty of sports. And that's why baseball has been at the forefront of helping knock down so many of those barriers. But the intellectual aspect of our story is one that we do want people to understand.
So on the prospect end of things, I had the opportunity on your Black Diamonds podcast to listen to you, which, by the way, folks, if you can get on your podcatcher and listen to that, that is a tremendous podcast, and you can really hear Bob tell some stories on that podcast. But I had the opportunity to listen to you talk to Ian Moeller when he was in high school. And, you know, Ian's coming up as a potential player at catcher, but a black catcher is just something we still to this day don't see, but you certainly haven't seen very often in the major leagues, even after the color barrier got broken. And that was kind of opened my eyes a little bit to there's still more work to do. And just for you, where do you see that within the game continuing to include our black communities into the game, our, you know, all of our communities equally into the game? What are we doing that we can do better, Bob?
Well, and you're absolutely right. You know, it was fascinating, and I really enjoyed having that conversation with Ian because he's playing a position that just did not transition into Major League Baseball. And the catcher's position, as you both know, was seen as that cerebral position. And then it was the closest position to the manager. So there were so many great catchers in the Negro Leagues who didn't get that opportunity because it was almost like being the black quarterback, you know. And so the pitching and catching position just did not transition from the Negro Leagues, even though you had very dominant pitchers in the Negro Leagues. and you had great catchers in the Negro Leagues.
Mhm.
Honestly, I think you can make a case that the catching position in the Negro Leagues certainly was just as good. Some might argue even better than it was in the major leagues. And so you had great backstops there, but they never really got an opportunity because, again, I think as they were selecting these players to come in, they never looked at them to play that role. It was too close to that white manager. And again, there's a reason that you see a lot of catchers become managers because it was the closest position to the manager. Now it's changed now because the catching position doesn't call the game the way that they used to back in that day. And but so many great catchers in the Negro League. So you get a Roy Campanella, and ultimately you get an Elston Howard, although Elston Howard was not really a catcher when he was playing in the Negro Leagues. He played more outfield than he did the catching position, and the Yankees converted him to a catcher. And of course, the Yankees catcher was Yogi Berra. And so when Yogi Berra is your catcher, you ain't ever going to catch. So Ellie toiled in the minor leagues for years, but once he got a chance to come up, he became the heart and soul of those great Yankee teams and the first African-American MVP in the American League. And so we know that we still have work to do, but I am so proud to be a partner with Major League Baseball and the Players Association to help become a solution in helping bridge the gap between the African-American community and our sport. And the measures that are being put in specifically to bridge the economic divide that has caused a lot of urban kids to not be able to play the game because they can't afford to play the game. We're bridging that gap and we're creating opportunities. And the programs that they're implementing are starting to pay dividends. We have to be patient. And one thing that we are collectively as a society, we're not patient. We want everything to happen instantly. So the solution is not going to happen instantly. But I think we're well on our way. And I don't know if that's the Buck O'Neil optimism inside of me, but I truly believe that we are well on our way to seeing this game become more balanced, that you're going to see the pendulum shift with more black kids, American-born black kids, playing this game and ultimately getting to the show.
I certainly hope so. In my research for this, finding so many historically black colleges just shuttering their baseball programs because the players aren't there, the money's not there. These are colleges that have such grand
Tremendous
history.
Absolutely.
Baseball, and it's just gone. As if it was
no, and I was in Vero Beach, Florida recently, there with the great Andre Dawson, where they were doing the Andre Dawson HBCU Classic.
Yep.
And I'm thrilled to see more HBCUs are trying to revive their baseball programs. Because again, historically, they were so much an important part of the story that I am a steward of and the work that we do at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. So it just broke your heart to see those schools not have baseball again. And even some of those schools who had baseball, they weren't black kids playing it, you know, on those HBCU teams. And so to see those programs starting to come back again, that is very, very exciting. And to see them get the kind of exposure that will maybe be an additional motivating factor to get more kids playing at the collegiate level. So that's very exciting as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we've talked about Buck a few times. I got to say, my introduction to Buck was, I think, what a lot of America's introduction to Buck was, watching Ken Burns baseball, where he absolutely stole the show. I mean, I can kind of tell you most of the other folks that talked about the history of the game, everyone that walked away could remember Buck O'Neil's name because he absolutely stole the show talking about the Negro Leagues. And not just that, but he also was asked plenty about baseball as he continued to experience it when he went in with the Cubs and things like that. I guess knowing for you right now at the museum, since Buck's passing, you've had your Thanks a Million Buck program going on. And I'd like to allow you to talk a little bit about the Buck O'Neil Research Institute and what that is proposed to be.
Well, first and foremost, I don't want people to ever forget Buck O'Neill and what Buck O'Neill meant, not to just the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, not to just the game of baseball, but what he meant to this nation. He represented the absolute best in the American spirit. And so I don't want people to ever forget Buck. And so his museum is a living testament to his spirit. And the fact that, again, when I met him, that was one of the first things he said to me when I asked him why he wanted to build a museum, so that they wouldn't be forgotten. And that's been the constant quest, so that those who call the Negro Leagues home would never be forgotten. And our efforts to save the old Paseo YMCA. Yeah, you've got some great images of what it looked like when it was in a state of disrepair. It was a building that had been abandoned. It just happens to be the building that Andrew Root Foster led the meeting on February 13, 1920, to establish the Negro National League, the first successful organized baseball league, which is really why a Negro Leagues museum is rightfully in Kansas City, Missouri, just a stone's throw from where the leagues were organized, in that very building, the old Paseo YMCA. A few years ago, we took ownership of that building, which had been abandoned. And now we are in the process of renovating it to convert it into an education and research center in memory of Buck. And then last year, we just announced our plans to build a new 30+ thousand square foot standalone Negro Leagues Baseball Museum that will essentially be built adjacent to the historic Paseo YMCA, creating what I call the nation's first Negro Leagues campus as the gateway into historic 18th and Vine. And so that building will bear Buck's name because education was always at the forefront of his existence. You got to remember that this was a man who was denied an opportunity to attend his native high school in Sarasota, Florida, Sarasota High School. He couldn't go there because of the color of his skin. He would ultimately complete his high school and get a few years of college at Edward Waters College by way of Booker Grammar School and MMA Booker, who not only taught Buck educational lessons, but life lessons. And then he would get 2 years of college at Edward Waters College before the lure of professional baseball pulled him away from college. But he always understood the value of an important education. And so he was ecstatic to know that we were building an education and research center that would bear his name. And so that project is continuing. We're getting ever so close to finishing that project. And then I am excited about the probability and possibilities of building a brand new state-of-the-art Negro Leagues Baseball Museum right there attached to the very building that it all got started.
You know, I will have to say, one, if you want to call it a downfall for me, is that you won't be right next to the Jazz Museum anymore. Because, boy, is that a fun dual trip, is to hit both. My kids loved going to both when we went to it.
And it really is. We wish that we would have had a space alternative, but there was just no room to grow. And there is something very romantic about having this museum attached to where it all started. And it gives me an opportunity to centralize museum operations as opposed to trying to run two separate buildings. Yeah. And so, but, you know, our run there at the Jazz Museum, alongside the Jazz Museum, has been really, really special and very unique to Kansas City to have two tremendous cultural institutions under one roof. We'll maintain a working relationship and affiliation with the American Jazz Museum, even though we'll be just a block away or around the corner when we do complete our new home.
Absolutely. So I'm going to change gears a little bit here and talk about you've been calling yourself a steward of the history. I just wanted to touch on, I'm a bit of a gamer myself. So I wanted to touch on some of the tools you're using nowadays to reach that ever younger base of fans who don't know these stories, and specifically your partnership with Sony San Diego Studios and Storylines.
Yes, it's been amazing. It has literally been a game changer for the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. Of course, we introduced the Negro Leagues into the video game MLB The Show last year as part of the 2023 edition of MLB The Show. The new game is slated to come out on March 19th. Of course, we introduced it with 8 Negro League players in the game. This year, there will be 10 Negro League players added to the game, and it has been amazing. It has been overwhelmingly positively received. The gaming community has responded in ways in which, honestly, I think I may have been naive to just how big that community really is. And
You're
they
the best
have
part of the game now.
yeah, no, they have embraced it in ways that just kind of blows me away. And I am already feeling the impact through our turnstiles. People were coming to the museum last summer because they saw the museum in the video game. And what was even more funny is they wanted to meet the guy that was telling the stories in the video game, me. And so it has been, I think it's been one of the most significant things that our museum has ever done, because we're talking about millions of people around the globe who are now being introduced to the Negro Leagues. But not only are they being introduced, they're learning about them and they're falling in love with these unheralded athletes. But again, I tell people all the time, if anyone deserves to be in a video game, it would be the players from the Negro Leagues. And it's been just absolutely heartwarming to see the reaction that the game has gotten. And I'll be headed out to San Francisco in a few days, where Sony and the museum are being honored for how we're using a video game to teach history. And the Education Foundation is recognizing us for the innovative way in which we are teaching history through a video game. But, you know, I mean, you think about it. If you can be engaged, entertained, and educated at the same time, those are the best of all worlds. And that's exactly what we're seeing through this partnership with MLB The Show. We have a 5-year partnership with Sony. And so hopefully over the next 5 years, you're going to see any number of Negro League players added to the game, and their stories, the backstories behind these legendary players, as well as stories and vignettes about the general history of the Negro League. So it's been a tremendous teaching tool for the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, and it's adding relevancy to our story.
Absolutely. And you can still today pre-order the digital deluxe edition on Sony, Nintendo, and Xbox's websites, with proceeds going to the Negro League Museum. And you can pre-order the Negro Leagues edition at your local retailer, which also has proceeds going to the museum.
Yeah, no, it's, you know, it obviously has some tremendous financial ramification potential. So it's creating a stream of revenue as a partnership with Sony PlayStation, the charitable aspect that you just referenced. All of these things will continue to help the museum operate and do the kinds of things that we want to do, have the impact and reach that we feel that we want to have in terms of how we teach the life lessons of the Negro Leagues. The history is one aspect of it, but the life lessons that stem from this story of triumph over adversity may be just as, maybe more important today than ever before.
Absolutely.
And you're at Rickwood right now. You know, we're hearing. I just actually was able to for another job I had somebody who did a story recently on the still active Negro Leagues museums or ballparks. And
yes.
They had, I believe ESPN's 30 for 30 had Turkey Stearns' daughter on, or
Yes.
granddaughter on recently,
Yes.
talking about trying to restore the field in Detroit.
Hamtramck.
Yeah, and so I guess my question there is, what are our opportunities still to preserve and to keep around some of this history? Because everyone wants the new pretty stadium that's going to have the flashing lights and the big LED displays and the seats that can fit, you know, a guy like Chad and I, let's be honest. But you know, because those old stadiums, they
weren't built for us. They weren't built for us. No,
they weren't built for the big guys.
Sitting in the seats at Fenway, and that was not comfortable.
Oh no, nope. And you know, and And I was on a trip with a guy who was 6'7" and 180 pounds. And so it wasn't anywhere near the issue with wideness. It was because he could not fit his legs in one of those rows.
Yeah, he was virtually folded up by that time. Absolutely. Absolutely. But you're right. It's important that we try whenever we can to preserve these last vestibles that represent where Negro Leagues baseball was played.
Mm-hmm.
So Rickwood Field, which is the oldest active professional baseball park in the country, was home to the Birmingham Black Barons, where a 17-year-old kid by the name of Willie Mays began his career with the Birmingham Black Barons. Or Hinchcliffe Stadium in Paterson, New Jersey, that has just recently been restored. And I can't wait to go to the restored version. I was there when it was designated as a National Historic Landmark so that it couldn't be destroyed. And now they've renovated it. Hamtramck in Detroit, League Park in Cleveland. Those are really the only handful of places left that were home to the Negro Leagues. And I'm glad that they are being preserved, that history is being preserved, but they are active and they're coming to life by folks playing the game in those very same ballparks. But the ghost of those legendary Negro League stars reside in each of those facilities.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. And it's not even just preserving black baseball at this point.
It's baseball.
So many iconic, let's call them white stadiums, they're gone. Old Yankee Stadium, so much history of this game is gone. The one area that isn't gone is places like Rickwood.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and that's
we're not losing black baseball, we're just losing baseball.
The baseball, period.
That's not good for
and the history of that game, the history of our game is very important. No sport holds to its history the way baseball does. And so every time when you lose Yankee Stadium, you lost a lot of history. And of course the history's been documented, but the building itself is gone.
Feeling, that atmosphere is gone.
And I'm thrilled that I got a chance to go there before it was destroyed. And I'm thrilled that, people have found the wherewithal to save these historic landmarks, where baseball was being played, because it wasn't just the Birmingham Black Barons that played at Rickwood. The Birmingham Barons played at Rickwood. And other teams played there in Paterson, at the field there in Paterson, New Jersey, at Hinchcliffe. And so, no, it's about preserving baseball history, and it's all very important. And we're very honored to be a part in having a hand to assist with these preservation efforts and to continue to tout the significance of all of them.
Absolutely.
Just had a real good comment here, thanking you for preserving the legacy of these great players, but saying how cool Papa Bell would steal over 100 bases in today's major leagues.
Easily.
Easily, yeah. Well, and I guess you brought up some of the style of the play, and to me, that's always, as I get more and more and look more and more at and into history of Negro Leagues, or you read stuff on them, you watch any videos you can find. To me, that's one of the great things is, we have the Savannah Bananas going around nowadays and having a lot of fun with the game of baseball. It may not be played exactly as the rules you and I are used to, but my kids love watching Savannah Bananas stuff.
Yeah.
It gets them into the game.
They just had 9,000 people come through over multiple days here at Rickwood Field. Jake Peavy came out of retirement to pitch for the Bananas. They just had 41,000 people in Houston for a banana game in a major league stadium, and everybody's on their feet standing. You're not leaving to go to concession stand because you want to see what they're going to do. And in essence, they are the recreation of the old Indianapolis Clowns of the Negro Leagues, who did those same kinds of antics, and the fans just absolutely loved it. When I went to my first banana game, I watched everything that went on during that game. I don't know if there's ever been a time that I've watched everything that happened at a major league game. And I love Major League Baseball, but this is entertainment at its highest level. And there is something that I think we can take away from banana ball, that it won't erode what we see and how the game is played, at the major league level. But it does harken back to those days of the Negro Leagues when they understood that the game was entertainment, and it was entertainment in its highest form.
And that shadow ball and the, all that sort of stuff that they did at that time. But more than anything that I guess I got to experience here is going through and researching the barnstorming that happened here in South Dakota. We've never had a major league team here. We've never had a professional team here. We've had minor league teams based here. But Satchel Paige once pitched in the town I lived in, or that I live in. That is amazing to me. These guys would go on the road and they would have fun all off season, essentially taking the gospel of baseball around the game or around the
we were
country.
talking about that earlier today, and I don't know if the Negro Leagues get enough credit for how they helped grow our game, because they were taking the game to the people, and they were taking the game to places that they couldn't see Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball wasn't west of the Mississippi River. And through barnstorming, these heralded Negro League stars were riding into those towns, and they were giving people an opportunity to see up close and personal professional baseball. And as a result, they were helping grow the game and create a fan base that grew proportionately as a result of. And so that's something that we also love, because again, through barnstorming, they were taking this game to the people. They weren't waiting for the people to come to the game. They were taking the game to the people, and the people absolutely loved that brand of baseball that they were getting to witness.
Absolutely. We're going to wrap up soon here, but I want to just have you tell us some of your plans for the rest of the year for the museum and your goals for the next year or two. Obviously, we talked a lot about the expansion and the building, but just some of the exhibits and stuff you're working on.
It's a big year for us, but I think I say that every single year. Every single year. This game that's going to take place here on June 20th at Rickwood Field, the Major League Baseball salute to the Negro Leagues, that is going to be a seminal moment for Black baseball history, and I'm really excited about that. We just recently announced our plans where we commemorated this year as the 100th anniversary of the very first Negro League World Series held in 1924 between the Kansas City Monarchs and the Hilldale Club out of Darby, Pennsylvania. The Monarchs would win that first World Series and become the city of Kansas City's first major professional sports team champion of any kind in 1924. Kansas City is a city that has had the opportunity to celebrate many championships, whether it's the Royals and, of course, the dominance that we've seen with the Kansas City Chiefs. The soccer team has had great success. But that winning origin begins with the Kansas City Monarchs. And no sports franchise in Kansas City sports history won at the level in which the Monarchs did. And this gives us an opportunity to celebrate. And so we've got a year-long celebration that we've launched now, any number of events that will take place over the course of this year. And of course, starting this effort to raise money, a capital campaign to build this new Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. So there are a lot of great things happening. I hope those who are listening to the show will make their way to Kansas City at some point in time and see what I honestly believe is the best baseball history museum anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
And I say that with no disrespect to my friends in Cooperstown, because it is an amazing place, the National Baseball Hall of Fame. But the story that we document is one that you cannot get out of the pages of American history books. And that is what grabs the hearts of the people who come to Kansas City to learn about this history, but then you leave cheering the power of the human spirit to persevere and prevail.
Yeah, and I'll agree. My kids, I brought my kids to Kansas City, and they had the opportunity to come and see the museum. And when you can entertain, at the time they were 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, when you can entertain children of that age, have my wife, who's not anywhere near as much of a baseball nut as I am, going through and really being interested in the displays. And then you also have the history and everything else to draw in a guy like me. You've got a hell of a museum. Let's just put it that way, that it allows to grab all those folks.
Absolutely. We're very proud of what we've done, and we think we've only scratched the surface. The future is tremendously bright for the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, and there are still so many stories that are left for us to tell, and again, to create a relevant experience for our young people, that they're not only coming there for history's sake, but they're getting an opportunity to understand how this history impacts their lives today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this has been everything I could have ever dreamed for, and then some. I am incredible. I'm almost in tears. This has just been an incredible honor. I want to thank you, Bob, for taking time out of what seems like a very busy day, and just honoring us with your knowledge and your experience and just your joy and love of baseball.
Guys, it's been my absolute pleasure, man. Thank y'all so much for having me. Thank you
Yeah.
all for everything that you're doing to continue to advocate for the work that we do at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. You're helping build new fans of this history and hopefully new supporters of our museum.
And just so folks can see, folks that aren't watching the YouTube, I put up in our background here the website for the museum, and that is nlbm.com. And they have a great shop. It's where I got this hat. Actually, I believe I might have gotten that in person, but I
that is
have
the
plenty of things.
1924 Kansas City Monarchs.
There we go.
Yeah.
There we go. But there's great stuff in the shop. There's always great stories as you read through. I don't know how many times I haven't been to the site in a while, Bob, and I come on and you guys have something just like this, the cultural connection here, or the women in baseball is down here. Just there's always something great on this website to learn about the history of baseball that maybe you just didn't know. And there's so many things that about the history of baseball that we just don't know. And that's the great part. And I want to thank you, just like Chad did, for coming on and for taking the time to share some stories with us. And it has been an honor. Thank you for your time. Want to once again encourage those who are watching. We've had a tremendous crowd watching live the entire time as we've been talking for our normal use. So, Bob, you bring the crowd. There you go. But for those who are new here, we'd love to have you like and subscribe. We come out with podcasts on fantasy baseball, on prospects, on all sorts of things on this channel. And sometimes they're a little goofy, sometimes they're a little weird, but sometimes we get the honor of talking to a guy like Bob, and we can really dig into the nuts and bolts and the dirt and the grit of the game. And that's what we love doing around here, is being able to explore all ends of it. So thank you, Bob. And for Chad and myself, we'll sign off. Thank you all.
Guys, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.